Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Role of the vCISO in the Modern Enterprise. My name is Candace Smith, and I am BARR Advisory's Marketing Manager for Events and Brand Experiences. Today, joining me are Mitch Evans, Director of Cybersecurity Consulting, and Larry Kinkaid, Manager of Cybersecurity Consulting for BARR, as well as Eric Etherington, Founder and CISO at Security.io. I'll have the speakers introduce themselves in just a moment, but before I do, let me tell you a little bit about BARR Advisory. So we are a cloud-based security and compliance solutions provider specializing in cybersecurity consulting and compliance for companies with high-value information in cloud environments like AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. A trusted advisor to some of the fastest-growing cloud-based organizations around the globe, BARR simplifies compliance across multiple regulatory and customer requirements in highly regulated industries, including technology, financial services, healthcare, and government. All right, and so with that, Mitch, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and provide some of your background?
Yeah, thanks, Candace. My name is Mitch Evans, the Director of BARR's Cybersecurity Consulting Practice. I've been with BARR for over eight years, and I lead a team of consultants helping people implement cybersecurity programs, acting as a virtual CISO, that executive presence on to our clients and advocating for their cybersecurity culture and needs. And Larry Kinkaid, I'll pass it to you. He's on my team.
Yep. Larry Kinkaid, BARR Advisory Manager, Cybersecurity Consulting. I've been here just under 4 years. Before that, I spent 2 years at Domino's Pizza, and then 5 years at Marathon Petroleum. So a little over a decade experience doing compliance program implementations, but really gotten really comprehensive understanding of risk from varying degrees, and again taking pragmatic approaches to implementing those programs. So happy to be here. And then we got Eric with us as well.
Thanks, Larry. I'm Eric Etherington. I'm the founder and CISO for my own company, Security.io. I've been doing fractional CISO work for about 3 or 4 years now. Prior to that, I was the CISO at Dolby Laboratories for quite a few years and also led security compliance at Uber.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. Thank you all for the introductions. So today we're going to have an in-depth conversation on the role of virtual chief information security officers, or vCISOs or vCISOs, as I always like to confuse them, in today's modern business. So our expert speakers will discuss when organizations might need a vCISO and how to effectively use the role for building not just an initial compliance strategy, but also a security foundation to maximize future growth. Our aim is that you'll leave with a strong understanding of how vCISOs can impact their business by creating a security roadmap anchored in a risk-based approach, including when to transition to a full-time security hire. And lastly, our speakers are going to explain how to use cybersecurity for sales enablement and the role of the vCISO in doing that. So with that, let me go over a couple quick housekeeping notes. Please utilize the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit any questions that you have, and we'll attempt to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Also, a recording of today's webinar will be provided after the event via email in case you missed something that you'd like to revisit or that you want to share with a colleague. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So our first topic is which types of organizations might need a vCISO, and when is the right time to think about bringing one aboard? And Larry, I'm actually going to kick this one to you first.
Okay. So all of them. No, but in all seriousness, it really depends on. I always like to say stakeholder expectations is kind of what I try to boil it down to, and typically people immediately think of customers, but really that entails investors, VC alike, in addition to insurance, cyber liability. It could also be internal stakeholders as well if you're handling. I mean, every company's handling at least the sensitive information they need to do payroll. So there's varying degrees, I think, of sensitivity in which it's warranted. But the first question I usually ask is how much time are you spending on it? What I find in a lot of my clients is they know more about security than they probably realize. But I think I know more about compliance, and compliance while it doesn't equal security, it's typically the language of security. So I can speak and at least decipher the expectations of the stakeholders based on the kinds of questions they're asking. I mean, it could straight up be, do you hold this certificate or maintain this report? But a lot of times it's just, hey, do you do X, Y, and Z? In which case, then I can be able to answer, okay, this is the spirit of what they're looking for, whether it's a more modern approach to what they're looking for that we're doing, or if it is more of the antiquated approach. So, how much time are you spending on it? And do you think it'd be valuable to have somebody decipher the questions on your behalf? Is really what I try to boil it down to.
Yeah, I think to add to that, the clients I typically see are B2B SaaS companies. When you're selling into enterprise, they don't necessarily know if you're 10 ex-Google employees working at home, or if you're a 1,000-person company, they're going to have a certain expectation of what your SaaS platform can do security-wise, whether that be certain attestations or certifications, or just be able to answer a whole lot of hard questions with good answers before they'll share their data with you. I think if you're in that situation, you should probably start thinking about getting someone in place to lead your program. Or if you're just going to be pulling in a lot of sensitive data. I also work with a lot of companies in the healthcare space because there's a lot of platforms that are kind of trying to help healthcare companies do more with their data because they don't really have the capabilities to do it themselves. So there's a lot of platforms out there now that pull in huge amounts of data, and HIPAA and high trust and those kind of certifications weren't necessarily written in the language of what you should do on your SaaS platform. So you definitely need an experienced person to be able to come in and kind of interpret that for you.
Yeah, and I'll just expound on, I guess, both those great answers. But what the experience that you're getting from someone like Eric or Larry or me, or another vCISO out there is you're getting someone who's done this a bunch of times with a bunch of different companies. Yes, the underlying interests, I guess, of those stakeholders Larry mentioned are the same interests or similar interests, but each company is different. And we've done this with, so many companies or organizations that we know how to apply an approach that works for each organization. And then, and that could be whether you're highly regulated or barely regulated. You might just want to do the right thing and implement a good security program, or you might have JP Morgan asking you to implement, equivalent security measures to what they have. We've done both of those and everything in between. So the other thing I would just reiterate that I think Larry mentioned was a lot of times these companies that at least we're working with, we're coming in and taking over what maybe a CTO, CEO, even COO, sometimes even HR managers are handling because they don't have this expertise. And that's obviously taking away at least some of their time, if not a lot of their time, that they could be spending on their day-to-day jobs, their own responsibilities. We see this a lot with software companies. They'll delegate this to a single engineer, or sometimes even the CTO, something like that. And those people have a very unique skill set that involves building products and services and software for other companies or individuals to use, and their talents are best spent there. It's not, we wouldn't ask LeBron James to sweep the arena after a game. We want him focusing on the basketball. And that's kind of what we do for our clients. I wouldn't say that what we do is exactly the same as sweeping the floor, but it's kind of taking on those things that these people are probably not as good as we are at doing, and letting them focus on what's important to the company and the business objectives of the company.
I think that's great that you're talking about the specific expertise. And I think I want to dive a little bit more into that. So can we talk about what value comes with bringing on the expertise of a vCISO? And Eric, do you want to jump into that and go a little bit more into the specifics?
Sure. I think this definitely builds off what Mitch said about things that might be second nature for us could be very hard for a CEO or CTO that hasn't gone through this before. So I think being able to set expectations and right size a program for what stage that the company's at and their growth trajectory. I definitely have some clients that are very small, and they're probably going to be small for a while until they're acquired. And then I have other clients that they're 30 people today, they're going to be 100 people in 6 months, they're going to be 300 people in a year, and they want to know, what does that mean for security? What do we need to be doing today to set us up for 6 months, for a year from now? And that's right sizing that program for the stage of where they are and the industry expectations, like we mentioned up front, I think is really important. Because security, you're only going to have so much time, so much resources and money to spend on it. So you really need to focus on the right things and do things in the right order. And I think the other thing would be building a security culture. You know, people want to do the right thing, but I think you need to kind of show them sometimes what that means from a technology point of view, from a culture point of view, from a process point of view. If you can kind of tell them this is what we need to do to be secure, people tend to buy in that, especially at earlier stage companies where people are really bought into the mission of the company. And if this becomes part of the mission early, it will really grow and become part of the culture of the company as they get bigger.
I really like the culture aspect then too, because I don't know, based on your experience, but security being the culture of no for a long time as well. It's important, I think, to set it up in a pragmatic sense as well. And kind of bringing back in the compliance element of, you can check boxes. It's very easy. And I think that in the spirit of right sizing, you're also coming up with more pragmatic, and especially in the cloud, there's more pragmatic ways to achieve those goals and objectives that make sense and actually add value. I mean, that's the number one goal I had about any compliance program that I do establish is, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to make sure that it's valuable. So within the culture in and of itself, and then and kind of on the flip side of the culture of no, it's the culture of yes and. All right, so we can do this, but here's how we have to do it, because we need to do it either in a secure way or in a methodical way.
Yeah, and I'll expound on what you said there at the end, Larry, is I think at least what we're really good at, my team is really good at, and that there's different skills that each vCISO has, but we're good at translating what is written down to what is reality for our customers or clients, and then taking what we just did there and communicating that back to their stakeholders, whether that is a JP Morgan or a healthcare company that's asking them to comply with high trust when maybe high trust isn't that relevant to them. But we've over the years, we've developed answers to the various questions or concerns that we can, again, translate for our clients and make sure that they have I think we've mentioned this a few times now, the right size security approach for what their business objectives are. And then one thing I would add that the expertise of a vCISO brings is you now have someone, and Eric, you mentioned this, but you're implementing a culture of security, not only within the engineering teams or the IT teams, but throughout the whole organization, and especially on an executive level. The vCISO can be an executive presence on board of directors meetings if necessary. They typically will serve as a representative on the security, or excuse me, on the executive team, to make sure that someone is advocating for the security and compliance needs of the company, and not so that they can just check a box, even though that's sometimes what we have to do, but so that we can align them with the business objectives and communicate why these things are important to a CEO or a CFO who's making budget decisions. And so that's really, I think, where the biggest value of a vCISO comes in, is that executive presence, not only within the organization, but also a customer comes to you and has these 5 concerns about your security program, and being able to communicate that to them in a way that they understand, so that you can close those deals or grow your business within that company's environment. That's where I think personally our vCISO's value really lies, is within those things. We can do all the tactical policy procedure, whatever it might be, help you through an audit, but really where the value comes in is what's up here and our experience over time.
Great. So I think it's awesome that we start high with, you know, the expertise and the importance. And now I want to start going down a little bit further and into what are some examples of services that a vCISO provides for an organization. And should there be a focus on a specific compliance framework? So Mitch, if you want to get us started with this topic.
Yeah. I'll answer that second part first about the specific framework. Frameworks are cool. They give you a good way to implement things. Sometimes you have to comply with certain frameworks if you're in certain industries. But really where every engagement I focus on starts with is what I call the crown jewels. So that could be, like Larry mentioned earlier, you might not be a very regulated type business, but you still have sensitive information about your employees. Well, those would be some of your crown jewels. But the first thing is to identify the crown jewels. Based on those, choose a framework. That might be a compliance framework. It might just be security best practices, but typically we will use a framework as the baseline, and then we're going to tailor that to not only achieve maybe a SOC 2 report or a PCI certification or whatever the compliance goal is, but we're also going to add in what we know is best practice based on that organization and their crown jewels and their interested parties. And what you can also do with the framework, obviously, is there's 100 controls or requirements, mechanisms within a framework. I've yet to see one have a client where all 100 apply to them. So, you know, it's really having that expertise to pick out what matters, what doesn't, and being able to communicate to those stakeholders why those don't matter or do matter. So that'd be my answer to the framework side of things. As far as like some specific services, it's classic that I already said I got ahead of myself here because it's kind of how I roll. But, you know, like I mentioned earlier, the executive leadership and presence with boards, executive teams, being able to communicate the need for a right-sized security approach and roadmap, help sales teams closing deals. This is something that Larry and I probably spend the vast majority of our client-focused time on, is answering those questions and helping ease customer concerns so that sales teams can close deals. Reducing friction in the sales cycle is what we call it. As many people here probably know, if you're in a sales process and there's any sort of friction at all, whether you're buying a bed or a $50,000 software deal, you're less likely to complete that sale if there's any sort of friction. So what we try to do is eliminate as much of that as we can. We also, and we'll touch a little bit more on this later, but our goal is to eventually help you have your own security team. So we'll help build out not only the roadmap for the mechanisms for security and compliance, but also a maturation of the program that includes hiring people to support the vCISO at first and the organization as a whole, but also, you know, our eventual replacement. And then Eric mentioned this earlier, but help foster a security aware culture within the organization. And again, it's not just, hey, engineers, make sure you have a secure code review or that you're following SDLC processes, but it's everybody, making sure that you are watching out for which emails you're opening and clicking on, downloading files, the files you're downloading, but making sure that you're kind of making security fun and interesting for each type of employee so that they don't make those mistakes that we've all heard about. Probably a new one today. Probably just happened as I said that. So, you know, help fostering that security culture within the organization.
I could probably add a couple things there on the, you know, on the strategy side. I think, or when it comes to compliance, I think the most important thing is to have a strategy. A lot of times when I start with clients, they say we need to do X, Y, and Z, and every compliance thing under the sun, and we want to do it in 6 months. And it's like, hold on, let's talk through those, why you arrived at that point. Because no one's going to be able to do all at once. And based on what they're trying to achieve, it's really important to kind of do them in the right order. And honestly, that's why on a lot of my engagements, I work with BARR because I think they're very good at helping clients have a strategy with what compliance they go after when, and making sure they're building towards something in the future, not biting off more they can chew right up front. And then in terms of kind of other things that vCISOs can supply, I think a lot of it is being kind of that bridge between, oh, here's what this standard says I need to do, a very generic looking control. What does that mean in GCP? What does that mean in AWS? This is how we operate today, and this is what the compliance or reg says we need to do. How do these fit together? And being able to interpret that and implement compliance and security into processes that they're already doing, it builds a lot of trust, and it also shows them that we can be secure, we can follow compliance, but still operate in a way that's efficient and works well. Anytime I have a client that says, hey, just tell me what I need to do for SOC 2 or what I need to do for HIPAA, and I'll have my team do it. And it's like, no, I want them to follow. We're going to build processes or inject security into existing processes so that they're just going to do what they normally do every day, but we're going to do it in a secure way, and we'll stay compliant. And when we do that audit 6 months from now, it's going to be a non-event because we've been operating in a compliant manner that whole time.
To build off that too, I think that you kind of touched on a little bit, but we're familiar with like the cloud native functionality within, AWS, Azure, and GCPs respectively. So we know like, okay, like this particular part of we can leverage here. But not only that, but just given the portfolio that is managed, there's different ways to go about when you leveraging different controls, and there's not a one size fit all. So I know products that I do prefer, and some that I may not, some that are up and coming, some that are getting into the startup and small to medium sized business space. So I get to workshop different kinds of products and tools and approaches for various controls throughout. So if I find something that works over here, maybe it'll work over here as well. So we get that the breadth of that knowledge as well. Another thing, Mitch called it tactical. I call it boring, but the policies and procedures, the business continuity drills, like not a lot of people find that as enjoyable as we do. But those are things that need to be done. And I'd say that's about, I don't know, like 25% of it in regards to at least setting up the program and the foundation. But then like 75% of it's project management as well. So it's being somebody that's responsible for coordination and understanding like, okay, you said you do this by this week. Where are we at with that? We need to make sure this is implemented by such and such a date so we can meet our roadmap and our goals and whatnot. So I cosplay as a project manager quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that, Larry. It's actually a skill set that we're looking for more and more when we bring on new people is, sometimes I'm like, I think I'd rather have some project management certifications than a CISSP or something like that, for example. Maybe not always, but sometimes. You guys kind of covered it all, but going back to what I said earlier is making sure that we're identifying those crown jewels, what the needs and expectations, requirements are of the key stakeholders, whether they're customers, investors, business partners, whoever it is making sure that we've identified those and then tailoring whatever framework or requirements we're using to build our program off of to those. That could be scaling up or scaling down, probably both, depending on what we're talking about. But for example, a cloud-based SaaS company, software company, doesn't need as robust of a business continuity program as someone like AWS that's providing data center hosting services for those cloud companies. We would customize those controls to fit the individual organization. And that's really important, not only for our purposes, for not having to, follow up on as much, I'd say, but also, those are waste. Implementing more than you need to is a waste of resources internally. And obviously we know, especially small, medium-sized businesses, those financial and people, human capital resources, they're very limited at times. And it's really critical to make sure that you're only implementing what you need to implement. Don't just, often we'll see like someone implement a a scanning tool just to say they do scans, and then find out that no one's following up on them, and most of the results of the scans are completely irrelevant anyway, or something like that. And that's a waste of time, money, and resources. So,
Yep.
All right. Well, talking about implementing what you need to implement and what you need to focus on, how can organizations use a vCISO for helping build out a security roadmap that takes a risk-based approach? And Larry, why don't you go ahead and take this one?
Ooh, Eric, you had something good earlier in which you were like, you know, I want to do all these frameworks and I want to do them within 6 months. Of course, you know, the idea is that we're gonna piecemeal things, we're gonna figure things out, we're gonna come up with a legitimate roadmap. And I find that like when I communicate with client customers, like the spirit of security isn't that, you know, you get the certification and you're secure. It's a journey, right? So knowing that we have a roadmap and a game plan and an objective or goals, whether they're short term or long term, I think really resonates not with any stakeholder. So I think identifying the right frameworks for the right industries. There's some, you know, namesakes like your ISO 27001s and your SOC 2 Type 2s that have become pretty much the de factos. But you know, high trust I think is getting more and more steam, even outside of healthcare at this point. FedRAMP, of course. But you know, insert, pull, and replace here. There's so many of them. But it really, what's going to get you the most clout within your industry and your customers. But one thing that I always throw in there then too, and it's kind of you know, in a proactive sense, the frameworks allow you to be proactive, but even your more mature programs are going to have reactive elements to them as well. So I like to let my customers help me determine that, not just based on framework, but if I start seeing questions come up for a specific requirement of control over and over and over again, all right, let's talk about it with the committee. Let's figure out, is this something that will benefit us? Is there a way that we can approach this? And the example that I give is phishing simulations. No requirements that I see for those in regards to like hard and fast requirements beyond, you know, your general security awareness training, but they're so valuable. And I just saw them keep coming up over and over again. So we found a partnership in which we could implement those in an effective way and meaningful way. And it's one of my favorite controls to manage, because you know, you have really good conversations. It sparks the right kinds of people to think about things. I got myself on my own phishing simulation the other day. So to be fair though, it looked like it was coming from a marketer, and you know, it was an Adobe one. So I'm like, oh, they're just trying to show me something cool. It was like a perfect storm. But anyways, kind of trailing off a bit there. But I like to use my customer questionnaires and their expectations and the different kinds of things that they're asking about to help me think through what makes sense for us.
I really like to start out with a more formal risk assessment as part of onboarding with a client. Number one, it's the best way for me to learn the environment, to understand what maturity level they're at today, meet the key stakeholders, who owns what. Let's start to develop a governance model and understand where the gaps are. Because as we start to develop a roadmap, it has to be based on risk. And we have to identify those areas that we're going to get the most bang for the buck early. And those things are going to be foundational that you build the program off of. You know, we're likely going to spend more time talking about preventative controls and how do we prevent being breached. And if we're able to do that, maybe we don't have to spend as much time on incident response and really advanced anomaly detections, because we're going to prevent as much as we can. And then it'll become a lot easier to spot that needle in the haystack, because the haystack will be smaller and we'll have a much better idea of what's normal in the environment versus what's abnormal. When you've got a lot of holes, it can be very hard to respond to anything because you're just not going to identify things correctly. So, you know, when you do that risk assessment, you're going to come up with a roadmap. And then you're going to, you know, I think one of the other things I bring with myself to any company would be a network. Just like any executive, I know all the vendors. I know lots of other people in the field. So if a question comes up that I don't know the answer to, I have a network of people that I can reach out to and find an answer quickly. So, you know, a lot of those things that a CTO or a CEO might not know or have to, you know, go through their network, you know, those are things that either I've dealt with 100 times before, or I can get an answer quickly. And then lastly, on tooling, you know, early stage companies, you know, when I started doing this a few years ago, Cash was free and now cash is tight. So knowing what you should pay for a tool and what the right tool is for your given circumstance, it's worth a lot, because a lot of times they're going to talk to a vendor, the vendor's going to give them a price and they'll be like, great. And I'll say, hold on, that's not what we should be paying for that. So it's like anything, knowing what the right tool is, what the right time to put it in, and how much you should pay for it is important. And frankly, the regular executive team is probably not going to know those answers.
Yeah, and I would just add here to what you're saying about the network. Your network, Eric, is doing this job. You get humbled a lot, and it helps. I don't know that I've met many CISOs in general, but especially vCISOs who are too proud to ask for help. We all know that someone else knows an answer probably better than us for any answer we have. And it's all about having that network and the humility and willingness to go to your sometimes even competitors. I mean, technically, Eric, we could compete on some projects, but we're doing a webinar together. We've asked Eric questions before about strategy, how he does things, and we share those strategies. It's really important if you're looking for a vCISO to find someone with a good network, obviously, but also do they have that humility and kind of like, are they real people that are vulnerable and willing to ask for help if they don't know the answer? Because if you talk to someone who knows the answer to every question, they probably aren't giving you the answer to the question. So,
higher tides, right? Rise all ships, but it's nice. I think we're fortunate to have our attest department, so I always pick their brains on certain things, especially with when it comes to specific compliance. Like you said, we can pick Eric's brain. There's other firms and within the Rolodex that I like to work with as well. It's like almost like a big peer group in that way. And I found some really good audit partners as well, in which it's in the spirit of continuous improvement, which audit should always be looked at, not as a get you game or a tattle, if you will. It's all about the journey of becoming more and more secure day after day. Moving the needle is a metaphor that I like to use.
All right. So in terms of moving the needle, and in terms of security roadmaps, when should organizations move to hiring a full-time in-house security role? And
yeah.
I was going to say, Mitch,
I'll take that. Yeah. I'll hop in here. It's a funny question because, you're honestly, we're talking about replacing ourselves at these organizations. And we often tell our clients that is our end goal, because that means that they've grown enough, whether not obviously through our work, but through everyone's work at the organization and some little part that we do. They've grown big enough that they need internal people. It's not enough to have someone at 5, 10, 15, 20 hours a month. And so, eventually we understand that if this is a successful client, they're going to need that. So, there's some consideration. There's a bunch of considerations that I know Eric and Larry, you can add here, but for me, it's, obviously budget is always a consideration, but it's also how much your budget, as in what are you going to pay that person internally? What's the benefits costs, all that good stuff. But also, what are you already paying your vCISO? If you're getting to the point where you're close to what you would pay that full-time person, that's probably a sign. I kind of think of it as like, if the workload is getting to more than half of a full-time employee, it's probably time to start at least hiring internal security folks. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily hiring a CISO, but you can typically start slow with a hiring plan. And what we've seen and done with some of our clients is the first hire is a security engineer, someone who can take what we say and put it into a product or into put it into a product or the cloud, AWS, GCP. And then you might hire a compliance owner. So now you got a security engineer, compliance owner, taking care of like the tactical stuff that was probably assigned to an engineer or an IT person, HR person before, along with the vCISO. that role will typically morph into, maybe a middle level manager, director, manager of security and compliance. And those two people would obviously report to that person. And then if it was me, ideally you develop that person into a CISO. Doesn't mean that you have to follow that path, but I'm just trying to present a different way of, you don't have to go from vCISO to CISO. You can slowly move towards that as your budget allows. I mean, if you have the financial resources to just build a security team internally, go ahead, do it. But if you're working with a vCISO and want to do it more gradually, that's in my mind one of the best approaches there. So Eric, Larry, I don't know what you guys would add.
Yeah, I think you summed it up well. There's probably two paths that I typically see. One would be more of the security engineer path, where your security program, say I come in, we start building processes, we start putting in more tools. There's just going to be more operations coming out of that. And a lot of times that's carved up between multiple people, and it's 10-20% of their engineering job description. And then when it starts to become 25-50%, then maybe the engineering manager they report to isn't so happy that the engineering side is slowing down a little bit, or the product work they're supposed to be doing is slowing down because they're doing this operational day-to-day stuff for security that just has to get done. So a lot of times it'll be, well, let's take those 3 engineers who are wearing multiple hats, put them into one hat and hire a security engineer. And then everyone can focus on the right things. And you get the right skill set too. The engineers can go back to building, but they know the environment really well, and they're a great resource for that first security engineer that starts. The other path I often see is if a company is going to be pulling in really sensitive data and selling to enterprise, they might bring in a CISO right away, just because they need someone to be not only build the program, but also be the face of security for the company. So someone that can get on that security call with a large company and deal with a CISO at an enterprise company and understand what they're asking and give them the right answers. Doesn't mean that a CTO or CEO can't do that, but in a lot of cases, if a CTO gets on a security call and says, hey, I'm in charge of security, that can be a red flag for the other company to say, oh, what's your security team look like? Is it you and a couple of people? Then they start asking more questions. And that CTO probably knows that system inside and out and has good answers, but just from the sense of not having the CISO hat, that can raise red flags with larger companies. And honestly, when you deal with security teams, they're likely going to ask very specific questions that maybe you haven't dealt with before. So having someone that can do that will definitely help speed things along. And I know we're going to talk about sales enablement, so that's definitely another thing to keep in mind with that first hire.
Sure. And kind of thinking about it from a different purview, in that I celebrate, I say this a lot, I celebrate the success of my clients, because, the more successful they are, even outside of just security, but, they hit significant milestones and success or acquired, I celebrate those things. So the fact that they do get a CISO is something to celebrate and get excited for, that, hey, I was able to take a program from, point A all the way through to point B. In fact, I've helped hire replacements before. So some of my really good friends to this day in my network and my Rolodex come from those experiences. So it all benefits, and it all makes things even better. And at the end of the day, but that's my goal with any program, is to take them to the point where I'm no longer where they don't need vCISO services anymore. They get a true and proper CISO.
Eric touched a little bit on this here a moment ago. So lastly, we're going to talk about how organizations can use the vCISO to enable those sales departments. So let's see, Eric, I think if you want to just pick up where you were going to head on to in the question.
Sure. So, if I think about where companies are typically when I start with them and I meet the sales organization, I have sales folks reaching out to me saying, hey, we've got this deal, we almost closed it, and they just asked us about security. Can you fill out this 200-line questionnaire today, because this deal is dead in the water until we get past that? That's often how I start to meet salespeople. And frankly, I tend to know every salesperson before I know every engineer for that reason. So really what I try to do is number one, educate the sales team so they know here, they don't need to know things inside and out, every SOC 2 control that we're going to have, but they can know the 5 to 10 security things that make the company look good, that they can rely on and sell off of, and understand what their customers are going to ask them for. But then really being able to turn that from a place where a salesperson is afraid of being asked about security to where we bring it up first. A lot of that is developing the collateral and processes they need to be able to serve that up to customers in the way that the customer wants it. Because when that the process starts, it's our salesperson, their business stakeholder, and then they get comfortable. Hey, we love this product. Oh, but our security person's going to ask you something. It's like, let's have things ready to go to answer that security person's question right away. And let's do it in a way that we're going to get it right the first time. There's definitely times when I need to get on a call and talk to a CISO from another company or get a team comfortable, but usually it's because the prospect is just very conservative and wants a little handholding. Because 99% of the time we'll give them what they need to see up front. But as I mentioned before, that's the other part of sales enablement is if we get to a point where there was something on a pen test or there was something in a policy that a security leader on the other side says, I have a problem with this, I want to know more. I can get on a call and speak to that in more detail to say, oh, we don't have that control because we have this control, and that's why we don't do it that way. We do it this way, and it's actually better. So in any environment, not everyone's going to have the same controls. And when a prospect looks at it and there's something missing, there's usually a reason why. So being able to jump in and answer those questions and explain how the program's set up is really important.
And I like that you mentioned like empowering the sales team, but it's also it's so telling when a salesperson is avoiding the security conversation versus hitting it head on and using it as a driver for value. A couple ways that I enable them is through processes to handle these questionnaires or assessments, setting up a trust center with all of the artifacts and everything that you can think of, and continuing to update it with FAQs and updates. And and the cool thing is then too, because I'm managing the vendor risk management, I get to see what everybody else and what all the big players are doing as well. So I take that and I put it into my trust centers with my other clients as well, or even a little bit of a competitor research as well to see, okay, well, here's your competitors, what do their trust centers look like? In addition to that, using their knowledge base, whether it's a Notion, a Guru, a Confluence, is to put things into there so that way they can answer the questions themselves, or at least be empowered enough to have the right conversations and talk about security in an appropriate way. SOC 2 Type 2 is not a certification, right? That's a very popular one now that we all, of course, know about, but that's something that a salesperson should know about as well, or else those can set off red flags. But Eric, I do love going into conversations, especially when the trust center's been out there. They have, an agenda with really, really interesting questions that aren't covered. Like, let's talk about these things and do some risk management. And like I kind of talked about previously, maybe something comes out of these conversations with a customer that's like, oh yeah, this is something that we should consider. I think it's really receptive to be able to show the customer that we're not just here being like, this is what we do and this is how we do it, and this is the end all be all. It's like, no, we're in the spirit of continuous improvement. Whatever the mechanism is, we're going to take it and run with it. And it's an opportunity to boast about the program in other ways then too. And if it's not covered in the trust center, then I can add it to the trust center. So it's all just connecting the dots and getting everything into a place that takes at least everybody to the 90-yard line, and then we can punch it in on the 10.
Yeah,
so.
and just real quick to add, I've definitely had situations where a prospect will say, we want you to have this. And whether it's like low risk, high risk for us, if it's a big enough deal, that can move the needle at your company. So there will be times when, oh, the customer wants us to do it, and their deal's way bigger than what it would cost us to put this in place. Great, let's do it. So you can definitely get security improvements out of customers as well.
Yeah, I mean, you guys really covered it all. I would just say that, of course, a Michigan fan would say the 90-yard line.
I always said
10-yard line, I think, is what you meant, Larry.
I always said, then you give it to Blake Corum to punch it in. I almost said it.
Yeah, there you go. Just kidding, man. But yeah, I mean, you guys covered it all, I would say. But just to sum it up, it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier. But do whatever you can to reduce friction in the sales process. Like the analogy I used earlier, buying a bed. That's actually it's fresh on my mind. But if there's anything that gets in the way of that of closing that deal, from when that lead or prospect becomes qualified. I'm not sure exactly what the figure is, but I imagine it's a significant amount of decrease in the likelihood of that deal closing. So I think whatever you can do through process, like Larry said, through trust centers, questionnaires, managing questionnaires in a efficient process, arming salespeople with the information they need, and being proactive in that at the end is upfront with the client. Define, hey, when a prospect is at this percentage of closing, that's when we send our security stuff. We don't wait for a questionnaire. And typically you can get rid of 80-90% of those questions and even the questionnaire as a whole by doing that up front. So I think the overall theme is themes are reduce friction and to be proactive in this instead of reactive.
Isn't that what we all aspire to? All right. So thank you, Mitch, Larry, and Eric for this comprehensive and forward-thinking presentation or conversation. I'd like to spend the last few minutes of the call going over any questions that we've had come in from the audience. And so as a reminder, if you haven't had a chance to submit your question and you have one, please submit that in the Q&A feature or raise your hand and I can take you off mute and you can ask it live if you'd like. We do have one, and I'm going to read this off here for the guys. So what inspired you to be a vCISO? And I don't know, let's go with Eric first.
Okay. So prior to being a vCISO, I'd been a CISO at Dolby for a number of years. And I was kind of at that stage where, do I want to jump off and get on the startup hamster wheel and do that every 2 years and move on to the next, But frankly, prior to working at Dolby, I did consulting work, much like Mitch and Larry, and I really enjoyed working with multiple clients. Taking what I'd learned at Dolby over 10 years and saying, oh, I can apply this in lots of different ways. And then, you learn one thing at company A, you can apply it at company B, and you're constantly in a state of learning. And then that way, I'm not kind of hitching my horse to one buggy. I'm working with a whole suite of clients, and I'm continuously learning and challenge myself. And I never get bored. A lot of times you go and you work at a company and you get security 90% there, and then that other 10% you spend the next 5 years pushing a boulder up a hill trying to get that last 10%, and it's tough. Whereas, when you work with the smaller companies and you do that first 80% for them, number one, they have total gratitude for you to come in and do it when they didn't know how to do it. But the constant learning and just being exposed to different environments like you do in a consulting world, that's what keeps me going and keeps me interested.
Love it. A little bit of a different trajectory, but like I with my enterprise experience, I feel like, I got to quit like a really, really like robust skill set from that. And then I know I was actually looking to join startups, and it's, to find your expertise that's needed within a startup because they're not ready for, CISOs or even directors of information security. I found that the consulting route allowed me to work with startups and the modern tech stacks, and not only that, but then be also like being able to take my experience with enterprises and apply it at the small to medium sized business level is really rewarding. And then, the challenges you get day after day, the puzzles, the different industries, right? It's every day is something different, and it's really engaging and motivating.
Yeah, I would say my answers are similar. I failed to mention this earlier, but I came from KPMG, Big Four background, working with a lot of enterprises. Like, I didn't work with Domino's, but similar. And just kind of feeling like I was a little bit small in that environment. Not that I really care about having like any sort of ego or anything, but I think having more of an impact, I guess, is what I'm saying, and seeing the results of things is what keeps me inspired day to day. I think it's really fun to have each, in fact, Larry and I were talking about this yesterday, but I'm a little more senior than the rest of my staff, so I don't work on clients as much, but I really enjoy keeping my skills sharp, working with whichever clients I can, and learning from them, learning from my team, learning from the challenges that come up. And I like being able, I'm not generally a very creative person, but I think this gives me a kind of right-brained way of having some creativity in my day-to-day life. And those challenges are kind of fun as they come up each day. And yeah, so that's probably what I'd say, is just those unique challenges and opportunities to work with different people and organizations.
Awesome. Well, I have my own question that I'd like to throw out there, since we still have time in a Q&A, and I saw someone literally just drop one in right this second. But are there any trends in the industry right now that need to be top of mind? Specifically, I'm thinking of like AI, or anything that you're seeing as a hot topic that we'd like to discuss here real quick. Larry, I see you shaking your head, so.
Oh yeah, I mean you hit the nail on the head, right? AI is the sexy new like thing to talk about right now. But the way that I manage it from a security perspective is everybody has some AI exposure, because everybody can get, set up a ChatGPT account pretty easily, or use, BARD or Gemini as it now, and then Copilot, of course. But in the spirit of that, it goes back into, the information and vendor risk management and understanding your exposure there. So it really, it's the usual suspects when it comes to controls and requirements, but it's just like it's a little more ambiguous as to what the information can go in there and what the sensitivity is. I think the thing that that I need to get better about, and I think that's still evolving, is AI as a product to customers, and how, like, okay, what's the exposure here? Is it being used to train the models? Is the model segmented from the other ones, or is it not used at all? What kind of decisions are being made off the AI? Is it the customer responsibility? What's in the terms and conditions? It really blows up from there, as far as like offering AI as a product to enrich what you already have. And I think that's where the conversation really goes, for me at least. The other thing though too, and I think this is, going on a decade now, is ransomware. That's always something I see quite a bit as well. And how, do you have a ransomware playbook? And actually, and then the past couple of years, you have a pandemic playbook. So there's different things that I think people kind of either take from other people and adapt, or have developed themselves just based on recent memory.
Yeah, I think AI is definitely the number one thing by a long shot. But I think the thing that's a little bit different about it is that the prospects that are coming in, every company's trying to figure out how to use AI for themselves. So when I work with a B2B SaaS company, they're trying to use AI in their product to make their product better for their customers. Customers are trying to use products that have AI to give them an advantage. And those customers that are coming in to use your product, on the one hand, the security team is trying to understand what governance is there built into how you use AI, to what Larry said about making sure the models are not being trained on their data or how it's being trained. But at the same time, that business stakeholder, they're under the gun from their executive and board to say, how are we using AI? What tools are we using to make our company more successful? So that security team, yeah, they get to ask some questions, but the business stakeholders right behind them saying, we need this, we need this. So kind of going back to that sales enablement, being able to clearly state how your company is using AI securely will help that process go quickly, because I think that is the one sticky wicket in the security process right now, is those companies want AI-based companies badly to help them move forward. But the security team's trying to figure out what questions to ask, when do we ask them, what are the right answers? Everyone's kind of figuring that out real time.
I think we're
and
fortunate.
I would just
okay.
I'd just add real quick on that. You guys kind of covered the AI topic, but one thing that I would just add there is, it's intimidating. It's obviously growing like crazy, and it's developing very rapidly. But and there will be a lot of changes to frameworks, requirements, and all that that goes along with technological developments. But what you can kind of rest your hat on is that the overall principles of having a security or compliance program are going to be the same. It's how
Mhm.
you implement them out on a tactical level that would change. And again, that's the value of a vCISO, is to say, hey, we're still, let's keep our eyes on the prize. We're going to change how we get there. Just like a coach might change their game plan based on whichever team they're playing. Our overall strategy is the same, but we're going to tweak it a little bit so that we can beat this specific opponent. And in this case, we're not beating an opponent per se, but we're tailoring our security processes to new technologies. So yeah, sorry, Larry, I jumped in for you.
You're good because another good sports analogy to throw in there. I think sports is on the brain. And to kind of build a little bit about Eric, what you were saying though too is that we're fortunate that we get to work with organizations that are embracing AI, because then we get to face these problems and these puzzles head on. So we're more of the Moneyball or the Oakland A's approach, and like, okay, we're gonna be I use modern quite a bit, but that's the way I think about it. And that we're going to be approaching AI and leveraging it and being able to do improve our business with it, as opposed to the alternative, because there are organizations that are more conservative that are just like, nope, we're not dealing with that yet. We're just gonna block it outright and prevent it and make sure that's just not something that we're willing to dip our toe in. And I mean, that is an approach, but then you don't really get to have the right conversations around, okay, well, how do we use this to improve and manage it appropriately? So again, Oakland A's reference for Moneyball.
All right, well, I'm going to go over this last question and then we'll wrap things up here. So is the goal always for the company to eventually build out their own internal InfoSec team or develop their own internal CISO?
I would say not necessarily. I mean, like Eric mentioned earlier, some companies just stay kind of the same size and don't have that need internally. I'd say the ultimate goal of what we do is to implement a right-sized security approach for that organization. If that means hiring a CISO, absolutely. If it means hiring only a security engineer, absolutely. But as long as we're working towards that right-sized security approach, we're moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. And I think to add to that, a lot of it just has to do with what the overall goal of the company is. If it's 10 guys who built a product that their goal is to get acquired in the next 1 to 2 years, they're likely they don't want to build out a team. They don't want to hire more people and give out more equity than they have to. They want to build and they're probably targeting their product at a market where there are big players that they know, company A, B, or C is gonna want us, and we have to make ourselves as attractive as possible. So let's not go overboard with building out a team. Let's be really good at what we do, but let's stay lean. And then there's other companies that say, we want to be the next Microsoft or the next Dropbox, and we're going to go after them. And our growth curve is like this. And, in those situations, I know I'm going in to build a team, and I'm going to hire directors, and I'm going to hire someone to replace me within a year. And if that doesn't happen, that means the company as a whole isn't meeting their goals.
All right, so with that, we are going to conclude the webinar for today. And thank you to everyone for attending and to our experts for sharing your expertise, insight, and transparency with us. We hope you found this information valuable and that you got all of your questions answered. Please watch your inbox for the email with the recording of the webinar, as well as how to connect with today's speakers to continue the conversation if you wish. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.